Shinto, a complete deep dive. Kami, purity, the living altar, and Japan's original sacred vision. The mountain is Ikami. The river is Ikami. The ancestor who died well is Ikami. The rice is Ikami. The sun is Amaterasu, and she is not distant. She is here, in the mirror, in the rice field, in every act of sincere attention. The kamidana on the shelf is the shrine in the home. Misogi is the water that washes what cannot be washed any other way. Musubi, the sacred creative force that makes all becoming possible. Personal reading Senas Halignali Panandang Pandagdag may 201,201. Isa Zero Produkan. Contents. Introduction, Japan's original sacred vision. Part 1, What Shinto is, beyond religion as the West understands it. Part 2, Kami, the sacred presence in everything. Part 3, the 8 million Kami, a living sacred ecology. Part 4, Musubi, sacred creative force and becoming. Part 5, Makoto, sincerity as the highest sacred quality. Part 6, Kiger and Hara, impurity and purification. Part 7, Misogi, water purification as sacred technology. Part 8, the Shinto shrine, sacred architecture and its meaning. Part 9, the Torii gate, the threshold between worlds. Part 10, the Honden, Haiden, and Temizuya. Part 11, the Kamidana, the home shrine. Part 12, the Batsudan, the ancestor shelf. Part 13, the Kamidana and Batsudan as living altar technology. Part 14, Norito, sacred prayer and invocation. Part 15, offerings to the Kami, Shinsen. Part 16, the Ofuda and Omamori, sacred talismans. Part 17, Matsuri, festivals as sacred technology. Part 18, major Matsuri and their Kami. Part 19, the portable shrine, Meikoshi. Part 20, death, ancestors, and the Kami relationship. Part 21, Izanagi and Izanami, the creation narrative. Part 22, Amaterasu, the sun goddess. Part 23, Susanoo, Tsukuyomi, and the divine siblings. Part 24, the major Kami and their domains. Part 25, Shinto and Buddhism, the thousand-year synthesis. Part 26, State Shinto, Sectarian Shinto, and Folk Shinto. Part 27, Grand Shrines, Ais, Izumo, Fushimi Inari. Part 28, the Haligricity Lens, Kami, Musubi, and the Living Altar. Introduction. Shinto, the way of the Kami, is Japan's oldest and most distinctively Japanese sacred tradition, way of being in relationship with the sacred that preceded Buddhism's arrival from China and Korea in the Anim Gigi centuries, that has coexisted with Buddhism for 14 centuries in synthesis so deep that the two traditions became nearly indistinguishable in many areas of Japanese religious life, and that persists today as the animating spiritual force beneath Japanese cultural identity in ways that most Japanese people would not describe as religious at all. Shinto has no founder, no central sacred text, no systematic theology, and no creed requiring assent. What it has is a living relationship with the Kami, set of practices for maintaining that relationship through purity, sincerity, and specific acts of offering and prayer, and a collection of shrines. From the smallest kamidana shelf in a private home to the immense complex of Ais Jingyu, where the Kami are present and accessible. For Haligricity, Shinto offers what no other tradition in the library provides as completely. The most fully developed living tradition of the home altar as a technology for maintaining ongoing relationship with specific sacred presences, the Kami and the ancestors, through daily practice. The Kamidana and Batsudan that sit in millions of Japanese homes are the most institutionally complete available models of what the Haligric living altar concept is working toward. A material sacred space in the home where the practitioner maintains continuous, specific, daily relationship with both the divine and the ancestral dimensions of their life. What Shinto is beyond religion as the West understands it. The word Shinto is Chinese-influenced reading of the Japanese characters, Shin and To, the way of the Kami. But categorizing Shinto as a religion in the Western sense, as a system of beliefs about supernatural beings that adherents subscribe to, misses its essential character. Shinto is less a set of beliefs and more a set of practices, a way of relating to the sacred presences that inhabit and animate the world, maintained through specific acts of purification, offering, and sincere attention. What Shinto is not. Shinto has no founder. No Gautama sat under a tree and received enlightenment. No prophet received divine revelation in cave. The tradition emerged from the accumulated sacred sensibility of the Japanese people across millennia. Their observations of the natural world's sacred character, their relationships with the Kami of the specific places they lived, and their honoring of ancestors who had joined the Kami world. This unfounded quality means Shinto has no dogma, no creed that must be affirmed, no heresy that must be avoided, no theology that must be mastered. Shinto's defining characteristics. Animist Hiki's core. Every element of the natural world, mountains, rivers, trees, rocks, the wind, the rain, specific animals, specific places, is potentially inhabited ki and expressive of kami. This is not mere animism in the sense of projecting human personalities onto natural phenomena. It is the recognition that the sacred is already and always present in the natural world, requiring only the practitioner's sincere attention to be perceived. Practice over belief. Shinto does not require belief in the kami, it requires behavior toward them. The question is not do you believe in kami, but do you behave in a way that maintains right relationship with kami? This shifts the tradition from the cognitive domain to the practical domain. This worldly orientation, unlike traditions focused on liberation from the material world or on afterlife salvation, Shinto is fundamentally concerned with this world, the health of the rice crop, the safety of the fishing boats, the well-being of the family, the proper celebration of transitions. The kami are concerned with the living world. Deeply local, each shrine is dedicated to the specific kami of that specific place, the kami of this mountain, this river, this family, this clan. Shinto is not universal in the sense that its specific sacred presences are tied to specific locations and lineages. The kami of Mount Fuji is not the same as the kami of Kyoto. Each place has its own sacred presence. Coexistence with Buddhism. For most of Japanese history, Shinto and Buddhism have been practiced together beside the same people, visiting the shrine for birth and marriage, the Buddhist temple for death and memorial. This practical synthesis is not contradictory in the Japanese sacred sensibility. It is the recognition that different sacred presences serve different human needs. Kami, the sacred presence in everything. Kami is the central concept of Shinto, and one of the most difficult sacred concepts to translate without distorting. The most common English translation is God, or spirit, but both miss the essential quality of kami. The 18th century scholar Motori Norinaga offered the most cited definition. Kami are, in the most general sense, all divine beings of heaven and earth that appear in the classical texts, and also the spirits enshrined in shrines. Furthermore, among all kinds of beings, including not only human beings but also such things as birds, beasts, trees, grass, seas, mountains, and so forth, any being whatsoever which possesses some eminent quality out of the ordinary, and is awe-inspiring, is called kami. The quality that makes something kami. The key phrase in Norinaga's definition is possesses some eminent quality out of the ordinary and is awe-inspiring. The Japanese word he uses, tafutoshi, carries the quality of something that commands reverence through its power, its excellence, or its sacred character. A massive, ancient tree with an extraordinary presence is kami. A mountain of unusual height or form is kami. A river whose floods and fertility have shaped a community for generations is kami. A person of extraordinary spiritual achievement can become kami after death. The category is not fixed, it is the recognition of sacred presence wherever it appears. Types kami. Nature kami, the kami of specific natural phenomena and specific natural places, the kami of mountains, rivers, the sea, forests, fields, and the agricultural cycles. These are among the most ancient and most widely honored kami. Ancestral kami, the kami of a specific family or clan lineage, the deified ancestor who has become the protective kami of their descendants. The relationship between a family and its yujigami is among the most intimate in the Shinto tradition. The family honors the ancestor kami, and the ancestor kami protects and guides the family. Cosmic kami, the kami described in the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Amaterasu, Susanoo, Izanagi and Izanami, and the many kami who participated in the creation of the Japanese islands and the divine order. Occupational kami, kami associated with specific human activities, the kami of the kitchen fire, the kami of the privy, the kami of business and commerce, the kami of learning, the kami of matchmaking. Exceptional human kami, human beings who achieved such extraordinary merit, through imperial lineage, through extraordinary service, or through remarkable spiritual achievement, that they were enshrined as kami after death. Tenjin, the war deity Hachiman, and the Emperor Meiji are examples of human beings who became enshrined kami. The 8 million kami, a living sacred ecology. The Japanese expression yaoyorozu no kami, 8 million kami, or more accurately, countless kami, describes the Shinto understanding of the sacred as pervasive throughout existence. This is not pantheism in the philosophical sense, but something closer to what the Shona tradition holds about the sacred, that the world is populated with specific sacred presences inhabiting specific things, places, and beings, each with their own character and their own relationship to the human world. The living sacred ecology. The 8 million kami constitute what might be called a living sacred ecology, web of sacred presences in dynamic relationship with each other, with the natural world, and with human beings. This ecology is not static. Kami can be injured, impurity and disrespect can be pleased kiss proper offerings and sincere attention, can depart from the place when treated carelessly, and can return when properly invited. The human community's responsibility is to maintain right relationship with the kami of their place, attending to the needs of the kami as one attends to the needs of distinguished guests who are simultaneously neighbors and protectors. Connection po haligricity. The Shinto recognition that 8 million kami inhabit the natural world, that every mountain, every river, every ancient tree, every remarkable natural phenomenon is sacred presence worthy of reverence, is the most institutionally complete living expression of what haligricity holds about the sacred ecology of the physical world. The haligric earthing and grounding practices, the recognition that specific stones carry specific energies, the understanding of plants and natural forces as sacred participants in the practitioner's life, all find their most complete ancient parallel in Shinto's Yoirozu no Kami. The world is not merely the backdrop against which sacred practice happens, it is itself the primary location of sacred presence. Musubi sacred creative force and becoming. Musubi is one of the most important and most distinctively Shinto concepts, the sacred creative force or vitality that underlies and animates all of existence, the power through which the kami bring things into being and through which all growth, connection, and becoming are possible. The word Musubi combines musu and baihai, the generative sacred power. Musubi's three dimensions. In Shinto thought, Musubi operates through three primary kami who are among the oldest in the tradition: the Takami Musubi no Kami, the Kami Musubi no Kami, and Amenomi Nakanoshi no Kami. These three together represent the primordial creative force that preceded and made possible all subsequent creation. But Musubi is not only cosmological, it is the same creative force present in every act of growth, connection, and generation in the ordinary world. Musubi's daily Shinto life. Land rice growing, the growth of rice, Japan's most sacred food, the food that sustains life, is Musubi operating at the agricultural level. Every stage of the rice cycle, from planting through harvest, is understood as the kami's creative force manifesting through the relationship between farmer, field, water, and sun. And human connection, the word musubi also means tying, binding, and gives rise to the Japanese word for marriage and for the practice of tying offerings. Every genuine human connection, the binding of one person to another through love, friendship, or vow, is musubi. The sacred objects, the specific knots used to bind sacred offerings, the specific way sacred objects are wrapped and presented. These are material expressions of musubi, the binding of sacred creative force into the specific form. T. Haligrid parallel, musubi, the sacred creative force that makes all growth, connection, and becoming possible, is the Shinto name for what the haligrid varescence works with when it supercharges intention through vibration. Both are recognitions that the sacred is not merely present in the world but actively creative, actively generative, and available to the practitioner who knows how to work with it. Making the varescence is an act of musubi. Makoto sincerity as the highest sacred quality. Makoto is the foundational ethical and spiritual quality in Shinto, the recognition that the kami are not primarily interested in elaborate ritual performance or the logical correctness, but in the practitioner's genuine, sincere orientation toward the sacred. A simple offering made with complete sincerity is worth more to the kami than an elaborate ceremony performed without genuine attention. Makoto and Harai. Makoto is directly connected to the Shinto understanding of impurity and purification. What makes the person's relationship with the kami effective is not their doctrinal correctness, but their internal quality, their genuine sincerity. Kigare is essentially the absence or obstruction of Makoto, the state of being clouded, distracted, or inauthentic in one's relationship with the sacred. Harai restores Makoto Gisai, removing the obstructions. Connection po haligricity. Makoto, sincerity as the foundational sacred quality, is the Shinto articulation of what the haligrid tetrality holds about alignment. The kami do not require the practitioner to think correctly about the kami, to speak the right words, or to perform the right actions in mechanical sense. What they require is that the practitioner's feeling, thinking, speaking, and doing are all genuinely, sincerely oriented toward right relationship with the sacred. Makoto is alignment. Alignment is Makoto. Kigare and Hara impurity and purification. The concepts of Kigare and Harai are among the most important and most distinctive in Shinto, forming the theological framework that explains human experience, relationship to the sacred, and the practices that restore that relationship when it is disrupted. What Kigare is? Kigare is not sin in the Abrahamic sense. It is not immoral failing that requires divine forgiveness. It is more closely related to the concept of ritual impurity found in many ancient traditions, a state of spiritual contamination that occurs through contact with death, blood, illness, mourning, childbirth, and other threshold experiences. Kigare is also associated with states of intense negative emotion, with dishonesty, and with the accumulation of daily living's accumulated weight that gradually obscures the practitioner's connection with the kami. Sources: Kigare. Death basic mourning, contact with death, including the death of a family member, attending a funeral, or visiting a cemetery, produces kigare. This is as traditional Shinto shrines post signs asking those in mourning not to visit during their mourning period. The kami are life-oriented, death's energy is antithetical to their domain. Blood wave illness, menstruation, childbirth, and illness have traditionally been sources of kigare. Not because these are morally wrong but because they mark threshold conditions that place the person outside the ordinary sacred order temporarily. Emotional pollution, intense anger, hatred, jealousy, grief, and despair gradually accumulate as kigare, clouding the practitioner's connection with the kami. The daily Misogi practice is partly directed at clearing this accumulated emotional weight. Tsumi, actions that violate the natural order or the social order, lying, theft, harm to others, create a specific form of kigare called tsumi. Tsumi requires specific hara ceremonies to clear. If distinction, kigare is not moral judgment, it is energetic reality. The practitioner who has been in contact with death is not bad. They are temporarily in a state that requires clearing before they can fully engage with the kami's life-affirming energy. The restoration is practical, not punitive. Misogi water purification as sacred technology. Misogi is the Shinto practice of ritual purification through water, the most powerful and most sacred form of hara available to the individual practitioner. Where hara can be performed through various means, Misogi specifically uses water as the purifying agent. Immersion in a natural body of water under specific conditions, with specific prayers, for the purpose of complete spiritual cleansing. The mythological origin. Misogi originates in one of the Kojiki's most important episodes. After Izanagi descended to Yomi to seek his deceased wife Izanami and fled from the pollution of death and decay, he purified himself in the river Tachibana Gile, washing his body in the water. As he washed, the kami were born from each purified part of his body, including, as he washed his left eye, Amaterasu the sun goddess, and as he washed his right eye, Tsukuyomi the moon god. The creation of the most important kami through the act of Misogi makes the purification practice literally cosmogonic, world-creating. Misogi gas practice, traditional Viv contemporary. Traditional Misogi, performed in a natural body of flowing water, the river or the ocean, the practitioner enters the water and performs specific prayers while remaining in the water. The flowing water carries away the kigare, the kami of the water purifies what human effort cannot. Traditional Misogi may be performed at dawn, facing the east. Waterfall Misogi, standing under a cold waterfall while reciting prayers, an intense form of Misogi practiced by ascetics, martial arts practitioners, and serious shrine practitioners. The waterfall's force and cold serve as both physical and spiritual shock, driving out kigare through the sheer intensity of the purifying water's impact. Contemporary simplified Misogi. For most Japanese people, Misogi is practiced in simplified forms. Temizu, the ritual hand-washing at the Temizuya basin at the shrine entrance. A miniaturized Misogi before approaching the kami morning phase, and hand-washing with conscious sacred intention. The domestic parallel to formal Misogi, the ritual bath taken with specific intention before shrine visits or ceremony, is salt bath purification. Salt is the most commonly used land-based purification agent in Shinto, thrown over the shoulder after a funeral, placed in small piles at the entrance of businesses and homes, used in sumo ceremonies. Salt is ocean water condensed. It carries Misogi's purifying quality in portable, storable form. Haligric application. Misogi, the deliberate, intentional use of water as purifying technology, is one of the most directly applicable Shinto practices to Haligric daily life. The practitioner who begins each opening of the day with a specific water practice and charges it with conscious intention to clear the day's accumulated weight is performing Misogi. The Haligric fruit and vegetable washing practice is a form of Misogi applied to the relationship between food and the practitioner. The Shinto shrine sacred architecture and its meaning. The Shinto shrine is the most important and most recognizable element of the Shinto sacred landscape. There are approximately 80,000 tandang bawas 100,000 shrines in Japan, from the immense complex of Ice Jingu to the teeny roadside shrine in a neighborhood alley. Each shrine is the dwelling place and the contact point for its specific kami or set of kami. Nive shrine's sacred function. Kami's dwelling, the shrine is not merely a place of human worship, it is the kami's home in the human world. The innermost building of the shrine houses the shinte, the sacred body of the kami, a specific object in which the kami spirit is enshrined. This shinte is the most sacred object in the shrine. It is never displayed publicly and is rarely seen even by the shrine's priests. Relationship maintained. The shrine's priests maintain the kami's dwelling through daily offerings of food, water, and sometimes sake, through regular cleaning of the sacred precinct, through the performance of specific rituals at specific times, and through the recitation of norito address to the kami. This is not passive custodianship, it is active, daily relationship maintenance. If visitors approach, the human visitor approaches the shrine as they would approach respected divine beings' home, with proper preparation, proper comportment, and proper offerings. The relationship between visitor and kami is genuine relationship between two parties, not to one-directional performance. The Torii Gate, the threshold between worlds. The Torii is the most immediately recognizable symbol of Shinto in the world, the distinctive gateway, typically painted vermilion red, that marks the entrance to a shrine's sacred precinct and the threshold between the ordinary world and the kami's domain. The Torii as threshold technology. Passing through the Torii is not merely entering different physical space, it is a conscious act of threshold crossing. The space between the Torii's uprights is the point where the ordinary world and the sacred world meet. Walking through it with conscious attention is an act of sacred transition. This is why the etiquette for approaching a shrine specifies walking to one side of the path and bowing as you pass through the Torii. The bow acknowledges the threshold, the transition from ordinary to sacred space. Torii sacred significance. The vermilion hei, the color of most Torii, derived from a specific mineral pigment, is understood in Japanese sacred aesthetics as the color of vitality, of the life force, of the sacred. It is the color that repels evil and attracts the sacred. The thousands of vermilion Torii at Fushimi Inari Shrine in Kyoto, stretching in continuous tunnels across the mountain, create one of the most concentrated sacred experiences of visual sacred power available anywhere. Multiple Torii. Many shrines have multiple Torii, typically at least two, with the outermost marking the entrance to the outer sacred precinct and inner ones marking successive deeper levels of approach to the Honden. Each successive Torii marks deeper penetration into the sacred. Niva Shimenawa, often attached to the Torii, to sacred trees, to large rocks, or to other significant natural objects. The Shimenawa is the sacred straw rope that marks the sacred character of the object it surrounds. Anything bounded Giva Shimenawa is understood as a dwelling of kami. The Honden, Haiden, and Temizuya shrine architecture in detail. Eva shrine structural elements. Tiva Honden, the innermost and most sacred building, the kami's actual dwelling, housing the Shintei. Access to the Honden is restricted to the shrine's senior priests and, on rare ceremonial occasions, to specific laypeople who have undergone proper preparation. Most visitors never see the interior of the Honden. Til Haiden, the building in front of the Honden where human worship is directed toward the enshrined kami. The Haiden is where the visitor stands to clap hands, make offerings, and pray. The visitor is facing the Honden through the Haiden, addressing the kami at respectful distance from their innermost dwelling. Temizuya, the stone or wood basin of running water located near the shrine entrance, where visitors perform the ritual hand and mouth purification before approaching the kami. The proper sequence: take the ladle in the right hand, fill it, pour water over the left hand, transfer to the left hand, pour over the right hand, fill the ladle again, take water in the left hand to rinse the mouth, pour the remaining water down the ladle handle. Komenu, the pairs of mythical lion dog creatures placed at shrine entrances, one with its mouth open, one with its mouth closed. Together they form on, the Japanese equivalent of the first and last sound of existence. The guardian lions protect the sacred space from malevolent influences. The small wooden plaques on which worshippers write their prayers and wishes, hung in designated areas of the shrine precinct. The ema are then periodically gathered and burned in a sacred fire, releasing the prayers to the kami through the smoke. This is one of the most directly practical Shinto prayer technologies. The kamidana, the home shrine. The kamidana is the home shrine, a miniature shrine installed on a high shelf in a specific location of the Japanese home, housing the kami's presence in the domestic space and serving as the primary location for the household's daily relationship with the kami. It is, without question, the most institutionally developed and most practically detailed living example of what the Haligric living altar concept is working toward. What the kamidana contains. As traditional kamidana contains a miniature shrine housing, inside which is placed the ofuda from the household's primary kami, most commonly from Ice Jingu. Additional ofuda may represent the kami of the local shrine and any specifically honored kami related to the household's occupation or family tradition. Before the kamidana stand specific offering vessels, a small mirror, two small vases for sakaki branches, sake cups, a water container, and a lamp or candle. The kamidana daily practice, complete sequence. The traditional daily kamidana practice is performed each morning. It is, in its completeness, one of the most beautiful home altar practices in any tradition. Isa, purification. The practitioner cleanses their hands and face before approaching the kamidana. In traditional practice, a full misogi. In daily modern practice, at minimum thorough hand washing with conscious intention. Dalawa, lighting. Candle or lamp is lit before the kamidana. The light acknowledges the kami's presence and makes the space between worlds visible. Tatlo, fresh water. The water offering vessel is refreshed with clean water, the most essential offering, representing purity and the renewal of the relationship. Apat, food offerings. Daily offerings typically include rice, salt, and water. More elaborate offerings on festival days may include sake, seafood, vegetables, and specific seasonal foods appropriate to the kami. 5. Sakaki branches. The small vases of sakaki are refreshed regularly. Sakaki is the most specifically sacred plant in Shinto. Its evergreen character represents the eternal nature of the kami. It is used in virtually every Shinto ceremony. 6. Tvgv des clap. Standing before the kamidana, the practitioner bows twice deeply, claps twice, and prays, typically the ohara no kotoba or personal prayer of gratitude and petition. Then bows once more. 7. Thieves' prayer. Nori to address to the specific kami enshrined, thanking them for the previous day's protection, acknowledging their continued presence, and requesting their ongoing guidance and care. 8. Thief close. The lamp is typically extinguished after the practice. The practitioner withdraws from the kamidana space with a final bow. The practice value is not in its elaborate performance, but in its daily consistency and genuine sincerity. A simple practice performed every day with Makoto builds a living, active relationship with the kami that grand ceremony performed once does not. The Batsudan, the ancestor altar. The Batsudan is the home ancestor altar, a cabinet shrine dedicated to the family's deceased ancestors, housing their memorial tablets, photographs, and offerings. Despite its name, the Batsudan in practice serves the distinctly Japanese function of maintaining ongoing relationship with the household's specific ancestors. A function that is Shinto in its essential animist character even when housed in Buddhist material form. What the Batsudan contains. As traditional Batsudan contains, the ihai of deceased family members, lacquered wooden tablets inscribed with the posthumous Buddhist name of each ancestor, photographs of the deceased, central Buddhist image, candles and incense. Small offering vessels for water, rice, tea, and the ancestors' favorite foods, and flowers. The Batsudan is typically a substantial piece of furniture. Unlike the kamidana, the Batsudan may be an elaborate lacquered cabinet that occupies significant place in the main room of the home. Batsudan practice, daily ancestor relationship. Daily offerings. Every morning, fresh water, cooked rice, and incense are offered at the Batsudan before the family eats. This, feeding the ancestors first, is the most fundamental expression of the relationship's living quality. The ancestors are present, and they are part of the household's daily life. Incense. The incense at the Batsudan serves multiple functions. It carries prayers to the ancestors, it purifies the space, and its specific fragrance creates the particular quality of sacred attention that ancestor communication requires. The incense at the Batsudan is lit at specific times and when specific needs arise. Speaking to the ancestors. Traditional practice involves speaking directly to the ancestors at the Batsudan, greeting them in the morning, telling them about the day's events, sharing good news, asking for guidance, or simply acknowledging their presence. This is not considered unusual or eccentric in traditional Japanese culture. It is the natural expression of the understanding that the ancestors are genuinely present. Favorite foods. On anniversaries, on significant occasions, and when something specific requires the ancestors' attention, their favorite foods are offered at the Batsudan, the specific dishes they most enjoyed in life. This specificity, the grandmother's favorite rice cake, the grandfather's preferred sake, expresses the understanding that the ancestors retained their individual personalities and preferences in the ancestor state. Obon, the annual midsummer period when the ancestors are understood to return to the family home for the visit. Lanterns are lit to guide them home, specific dances are performed for their entertainment, and specific foods are prepared and offered. At the festival's end, paper lanterns are floated on water to guide the ancestors back. Part 13. The kamidana and Batsudan as living altar technology, the most complete available model. The combination of the kamidana and the Batsudan in the Japanese home is the most institutionally complete, most practically developed, and most continuously practiced model of what the Haligric living altar concept is working toward. These are not memorial displays or symbolic gestures. They are active, living interfaces with specific sacred presences, maintained through specific daily practice within the practitioner's own home. What the Kamidana Batsudan system does. The Kamidana Batsudan system accomplishes, in its traditional Japanese form, everything that the Haligric living altar aims to accomplish. It maintains ongoing, specific relationship with divine presences and with ancestral presences. It does this through daily material practice, offering, prayer, incense, fresh food and water, not through intermittent ceremony or occasional devotion. The practitioner who maintains both practices has woven sacred relationship into the actual fabric of daily life, so that the first acts of each morning and the last of each night are acts of sacred relationship maintenance. Connection po haligricity. The Haligric living altar draws on multiple traditions: the Yoruba ancestor altar, the shamanic soul retrieval understanding of the self's multiple temporal dimensions, the Kemetic understanding of the Ka and the Ba, the Jungian inner child, quantum non-locality. The Kamidana Butsudan system provides the most complete practical model of what all of these traditions converge toward. A material sacred space in the home where the practitioner maintains active relationship with both the divine dimension and the ancestral dimension. The specific daily practices: the fresh water, the first rice, the incense, the bow and clap, the direct speech, are the living altar's practical technology at its most fully developed. Grand Rising. Norito sacred prayer and invocation. Norito are the formal liturgical prayers of Shinto, compositions in classical Japanese, typically composed kiths priests, addressed to specific kami for specific purposes. They are among the oldest surviving Japanese literary texts, and they demonstrate the Shinto understanding of language as sacred technology. Words spoken correctly, with proper intention, in proper context, have the capacity to move kami. Ayuri Norito def their functions. Ohara Kotoba, the most widely used Norito, a lengthy composition that recounts the mythological origin of purification, invokes the specific kami of purification, and addresses the removal of all chumi and kigere from the practitioner. Recited at major purification ceremonies and studied by serious practitioners for daily use. Tamafuri is a specific form of prayer associated with the shaking of sacred staff to rouse and invigorate the kami spirit, based on the understanding that kami, like all sacred presences, can become listless and need to be enlivened through a specific ritual action. Tamashizum, the companion to Tamafuri, the prayer that calms and settles the kami spirit when it has been aroused or disturbed, restoring the sacred presence to a stable, protective state. The language in Norito. Classical Japanese Norito are composed in a specific register of archaic language that is different from everyday speech, the elevated, formal language that signals to the kami that this is a sacred address rather than ordinary communication. This parallels the use of liturgical language in other traditions. The specific register of language marks the communication as crossing from the ordinary to the sacred. Offerings to the kami, shinsen, the sacred feeding of the divine. Shinsen are the food and drink offerings made to the kami, the most fundamental and most universal of all Shinto sacred acts. The understanding that the kami receive and are nourished by offerings made by humans is one of the most ancient and most practically important elements of the Shinto relational cosmology. Eve categories a shinsen. Ni the 5 basic offerings. In the simplest and most universal Shinto practice, the daily kamidana offering, 5 types of offering are presented: water, rice, salt, sake, and a seasonal food that reflects the current time of year. Seafood, fish, shellfish, and other sea products are offered at shrines. The sea's kami are honored through what the sea provides. Dried whole fish are among the most important ceremonial offerings. Sake, rice wine, is the most important liquid offering at Shinto ceremonies. The sake barrel stacked near shrine entrances are offerings to the kami, not sales displays. The sharing of sake between the kami and the worshippers is the most direct available form of communion with the kami. Seasonal foods, the first fruits of each season, the first rice of the harvest, the first fish of the fishing season, the first plum blossoms of spring, are among the most important offerings. Offering the first acknowledges the kami as the source of all abundance and thanks them specifically for what they have given. This principle, every shinsen offering is based on the recognition that the kami, despite their sacred character, are related to the human world through exchange. They provide protection, health, and abundance. Humans provide offerings, attention, and gratitude. The relationship is reciprocal. This is Aini in Japanese dress. Matsuri festivals as sacred technology. Matsuri are the seasonal and annual sacred festivals of Shinto, collective ceremonies in which the community gathers to honor and celebrate the kami, to present offerings on a scale beyond what daily practice makes possible, and to renew the relationship between the human community and the sacred presences that protect and sustain it. Matsuri are not merely cultural celebrations, they are sacred technologies for maintaining the health of the relationship between the human community and the kami world. The structure of Matsuri. Every Matsuri follows a basic 3-part structure: the kese, the sei, and the naore. Major types of Matsuri. Shunki Taisai, the agricultural prayers for a good planting season and abundant harvest, among the most ancient and most universally practiced Matsuri across Japan. The kami of rice and agriculture are specifically honored. Niinamesei Kanemsei, the harvest festivals in which the first fruits of the rice harvest are offered to the kami before anyone in the community eats the new rice. The emperor performs the imperial version annually. The recognition that the kami receive the first fruits before the human community receives any is the most fundamental expression of the relationship's proper hierarchy. Omatsuri, the local festivals associated with each neighborhood's tutelary shrine, typically involving the portable shrine procession through the neighborhood, street food, traditional performances, and communal celebration. These are the festivals most accessible to outside visitors and most expressive of Shinto's community-sustaining function. Setsuban, the seasonal division festival at the beginning of spring, marked Gyulai, the throwing of roasted soybeans to expel evil spirits and invite good fortune, and Gyulai, the specific purification ceremonies at major shrines. Setsuban is simultaneously community exorcism and New Year's beginning. Izanagi and Izanami, the Shinto creation narrative. The Shinto creation narrative, preserved primarily in the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, describes the formation of the Japanese islands and the divine world through the actions of the first divine couple, Izanagi and Izanami. It is one of the most dramatically complete and most psychologically rich creation narratives in any tradition. Eve's creation narrative, IGV episodes. Ni the primordial ocean, in the beginning, the land was young and like floating oil, drifting like jellyfish. From the heavenly plane, the kami Izanagi and Izanami were commanded to make, consolidate, and give birth to this drifting land. Ni a jeweled spear, Izanagi and Izanami stood on the floating bridge of heaven and thrust the jeweled spear of heaven downward into the brine. When they drew it up and the brine dripped from its tip, it consolidated into the island of Onogoro, the first land. EV sacred marriage, Izanagi and Izanami descended to Onogoro and performed the first wedding ceremony, circling the sacred pillar from opposite directions and speaking the words of union when they met. Their union produced the Japanese islands and the many kami. T's death Izanami, when Izanami gave birth to the fire kami, she was fatally burned. She descended to Yomi. Izanagi, grief-stricken, followed her, but she told him not to look at her. He looked, she was already rotting. He fled, she sent the demons of Yomi after him. At the boundary of Yomi, Izanagi rolled a great boulder to seal the entrance, and Izanami called out from inside that she would kill 1,000 people daily. Izanagi replied that he would cause 1,500 births daily. Death and life, in balance. Tire Misogi des is birth, Amaterasu, Izanagi purified himself at the river Tachibana, performing the first Misogi. As he washed, the major kami were born from the kigere he was washing away and from his newly purified body. Washing his left eye, Amaterasu was born. Washing his right eye, Tsukuyomi. Washing his nose, Susanoo. Amaterasu, the sun goddess and the mirror. Amaterasu Omikami is the most important and most widely honored kami in the Shinto tradition, the sun goddess from whom the imperial family traces its divine lineage, whose shrine at Ice is the most sacred in Japan, and whose symbolic presence in the mirror radiates through the tradition at every level. The cave retreat and the return of light. The most important Vaki associated with Amaterasu is the story of her withdrawal into the Ama no Iwato, after her brother Susanuo's violent behavior drove her to hide, plunging the world into darkness. The 8 million kami gathered outside the cave and devised a plan. They hung a mirror and jewels in the tree, and the kami no Uzum performed a wild, ecstatic dance that made all the kami burst into laughter. Amaterasu, curious about what could cause such joy in the dark world, opened the cave door to look and saw her own brilliant reflection in the mirror. Another kami pulled the door open, and the light returned to the world. Tiri sacred mirror, Tiri yata ti kagami. The yata no kagami, the mirror hung in the tree to lure Amaterasu from the cave, became one of the 3 sacred treasures of the Japanese imperial household. The mirror is the primary symbol of Amaterasu's sacred presence in the shrine. TV mirror ga, Shinto practice. Mirrors are placed at the center of shrine altars, both in public shrines and in the kamidana home shrine, as the material symbol of the kami's presence. The mirror's function is multiple. It reflects the sincere worshipper's own face back at them. It represents the light of the sun's sacred truth, and it is the ancient symbol of the pure heart that can perceive the sacred clearly. As Jingyu, the most sacred shrine in Japan, located in Ice, Mai Prefecture, is dedicated to Amaterasu and houses the Yata no Kagami. The outer shrine is dedicated to the kami of food and agriculture, the inner shrine to Amaterasu herself. As Jingyu is rebuilt from scratch every 20 years on the adjacent site, the most elaborate and most costly expression of the Shinto understanding that the sacred must be perpetually renewed, not merely preserved. Shinto and Buddhism, the thousand-year synthesis. When Buddhism arrived in Japan from Korea and China in the Annam-D century C, it encountered Shinto not as a competing religion that it would displace, but as a living sacred tradition with which it would form synthesis so deep and so durable that the 2 traditions became nearly inseparable for over 1,000 years. This synthesis, Shinbutsu Shugo, is one of the most sophisticated and most successful examples of religious synthesis in human history. How the synthesis worked. The synthesis operated through several mechanisms. the identification of specific kami with specific bodhisattvas or bodhas, the construction of Buddhist temples within Shinto shrine compounds, the use of Buddhist priests to perform ceremonies at Shinto shrines and Shinto priests to perform ceremonies at Buddhist temples, and the development of specific syncretic theologies. This practical result. This split sacred life. The practical result of the millennium-long Buddhist Shinto synthesis is the specific pattern of Japanese sacred life that persists today. Shinto for birth and life, Buddhism for death and memorial. Shinto domains, birth, childhood ceremonies, coming of age, marriage, and the celebration of life's passages. Buddhist domains, death and the subsequent memorial practices. The funeral is typically Buddhist, the grave is in a Buddhist temple cemetery, and the annual memorial ceremonies are Buddhist in form even as they serve the Shinto function of ancestor honoring. Kamidana Beith, Butsudan coexistence, the presence of both the kamidana and the Butsudan in the same home, honoring the kami through one and the ancestors through the other, is the most immediate and most domestic expression of this synthesis. The two altars do not compete, they serve different dimensions of the household's sacred life. Grand shrines Ise, Izumo, and Fushimi Inari. Is three most significant Shinto shrines. As Jingyu, the most sacred shrine in Japan, dedicated to Amaterasu Omikami, the supreme kami of the Shinto tradition. The inner shrine houses the sacred mirror. The outer shrine is dedicated to Toyuk, the kami of food and agriculture. The shrine is rebuilt in its entirety every 20 years, a practice that has continued for approximately 1,300 years, with the current structure completed every 2 decades from freshly cut cypress, and with new sacred objects made for each rebuilding. Access. The outer areas are open to visitors, the inner sanctuaries are not. Approaching with genuine reverence for the 1,300 years of continuous sacred activity at this site is the appropriate orientation. Izumo Taisha, the second most important shrine in Japan, dedicated to Okuninoshi no Mikoto, the kami of relationships, marriage, agriculture, and the connection between the living and the dead. The shrine is the destination for the annual gathering of all 8 million kami in the Isa-Zero Div lunar month. The distinctive 4 claps prayer gesture identifies Izumo's specific sacred character. Fushimi Inari Taisha, the head shrine of approximately 32,000 Inari shrines across Japan, dedicated to Inari, the kami of rice, agriculture, foxes, industry, worldly success, and swordsmanship. Famous for its seemingly endless tunnels of vermilion torii gates ascending Mount Inari, each gate donated to a person or business seeking Inari's blessing for their enterprise. The fox is Inari's messenger. The white fox figures at every Inari shrine are not the kami themselves, but the kami's sacred animal representatives. The Haligrisity lens kami, Musubi, and the living altar. Shinto-specific and irreplaceable gifts to Haligrisity are 3. The most institutionally complete model of the home altar as living sacred technology. The concept of Musubi as the sacred creative force available to the practitioner who works with intention and sacred attention. And the recognition that the natural world is not backdrop for human sacred activity, but itself the primary location of sacred presence. The Kamidana Butsudan and the Haligric living altar. The Haligric living altar draws on the Yoruba ancestor altar, the shamanic soul retrieval framework, the kemetic understanding of the ka, and the Jungyan inner child. All of these traditions point toward the same practical structure. The Kamidana Butsudan system is where that practical structure is most fully realized. Daily material offerings, specific prayers, fresh water and food, the direct address to specific sacred presences, and the understanding that the ancestors and the divine are genuinely present and genuinely responsive to sincere attention. This is the living altar in its most complete available form Misogi and the Haligric practice of purification. The Shinto Misogi practice, water purification as the technology for clearing accumulated kigare and restoring the practitioner's openness to the kami's presence, is the most fully developed ancient parallel to the Haligric understanding of daily purification practice. Every tradition in the Haligric library has some form of purification. Shinto has made it the foundational sacred technology through which all other practice becomes possible. Connection to Haligricity. The mountain is Ikami. The river is Ikami. The ancestor who died well is Ikami. And the practitioner who approaches these presences every morning with fresh water, with genuine offerings, with a bow and clap and a sincere prayer, that practitioner is doing what the Kamidana tradition has done in Japanese homes for 1,000 years. The living altar is not a new idea. It is a very old idea that Haligricity is recovering in a form that is relevant to the contemporary practitioner. The kami of ice have been receiving fresh offerings every morning for 1,300 years. The ancestors at the Butsudan have been receiving the first rice of every morning meal for as long as there have been Japanese households. This is the practice. This is what daily sacred relationship looks like in its most complete form, grand rising. Kami is that quality which makes something more than ordinary, more alive, more present, more real than the objects around it. To perceive kami is not superstition. It is the restoration of full attention to a world that is continuously more alive than we notice. Adapted from Motoori Norinaga's 18th century definition of kami. The tori marks the threshold. The temizu water washes the hands. The incense rises toward the kami. The first rice of the day is placed at the batsuden before the family eats. The ancestor is spoken to directly, via name, about what is happening in the family this week. The mountain is ikami and has been since before Japan had name for it. None of this requires belief. All of it requires attention. Grand Rising. Personal Reading Series Haligricity, I. Jilgi Productions, may 2026.